Is it
Five.
a good question?
How many books
Five.
are there in the Torah?
Five?
Five.
Five.
Five, I thought.
Okay, but there are 5 written, but what about the oral? And, that still counts, I think, no?
Well, that is definitely an opinion.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say with 5.
Right? So it depends what you mean by Torah. Right?
Mhm.
Just like most questions in Judaism. So the Torah can be the 5 books of Moses, which is often what people think of. There's also the prophets and the writings, and that's considered 24 books altogether, even though it's actually 39. And so often people refer to, when they're referring to the 5 books, the prophets and the writings, as the Tanakh, Torah, Nevi, and Ketuvim. And then also people refer to Torah in general when talking about the whole body of Torah, including the Talmud and the Mishnah and the Ritva and all kinds of things. So it's a trick question, but it's an important trick question, because when somebody says Torah, you may be thinking one thing and they may be thinking something else, and sometimes you need to clarify what they actually mean by that. Anyway, just an aside. So the book of Vayikra deals with korbanot, animal sacrifices, and the priestly practices that the Kohen does, as well as discussion of ritual purity. The entire Vayikra, the entire book, is very different to the Judaism we practice today, and most people find it very hard to relate to. I think that's safe to say.
Right.
So, what is a korban?
I don't know what you said.
What is a korban? Korban is the Hebrew word.
Korban?
That's used for animal sacrifice as well as for food sacrifice, right? The word korban comes from the word karov, which means closeness or nearness. It certainly includes the common translation of sacrifice, as well as the modern definition that we use for sacrifice of giving up something.
Okay.
But the distinction is important in helping us attempt to understand korbanot. And so the literal translation goes to the root word karov, which means close. So let's start with the modern definition and work our way to the literal translation. Modern definition of sacrifice from the Merriam-Webster dictionary. I will get this document to people if they want. I've put some hyperlinks in there. So anytime you see something in blue underlined, that means you can click into it for more information.
Rabbi, we could post it to the website after the class.
Perfect. Thank you.
No problem.
So the modern definition of sacrifice, the act of giving something that you want to keep, especially in order to get or do something else or to help someone. Right? That's when we... What's that?
Modern times.
Exactly. There are many ways to think of sacrifice at this time of crisis. So, thinking of my own experience, one of my jobs is as a hospice chaplain, my officially spiritual care counselor. And it's been a very difficult time of knowing what the right thing to do is. My instinct is to go out and visit people and comfort them and help them, and even to go into the ER and be a hero and try to help all these people who are suffering. As a father-to-be in the very near future, God willing, I know that I need to balance my responsibilities. Right?
Prioritize, yes. Prioritize.
Exactly. On the other hand, I also know that some people don't have that luxury. Like my coworkers who are nurses and doctors. who, they have to prioritize it because they have no choice. That's the career they chose. And every time they're going into work in a hospital or an environment where somebody may be infected, they're putting themselves at risk. And so they're literally sacrificing their safety.
Sure.
To some degree, right? Following several examples of heroes for us to think about. So I have an image here, a screenshot from Facebook from somebody named Elad Nehore. He's also known on the internet as Pop Chassid. And he has a huge following. And he writes, "Please daven for Morty Getz, a Satmar Chassid who has been on the front lines fighting for Hasidic Jews to stay home. He likely has saved many lives. He also was recently diagnosed with COVID. Spent Shabbat in the hospital, but tells me he is now home doing much better." Right? Putting this in context, as many of you have seen in the media, a lot of people in the Hasidic communities, as well as in Lakewood, have not taken this seriously quickly enough, to the point that one of the Satmar Rebbes is now infected. So this guy had the foresight to go and fight it, and in the process, he got infected. Thankfully, it sounds like he's doing better now. Hopefully, he has a refuah shalema.
Okay, all right.
Another person to think about is somebody, if you ever seen images from Israel of these little scooter ambulances, which is a brilliant idea because in New York City, we see ambulances sitting in traffic, blaring and screaming and going nowhere.
Right.
In Israel, they have these little scooters who normally I get very upset when motorcycles and scooters zip between cars. But
they can.
Case,
they can. They can get between.
They can, but they also, it's also dangerous. But in this case, they're literally saving lives.
Sure.
And it was this guy's idea. His name is, I forget his name, Eli Beer. And this is from the Jerusalem Post. Public is asked to pray for Eliezer Yehuda Ben Chaya, founder and president of United Hatzalah in Israel, after being placed on a respirator after contracting COVID-19. Right? Okay. So here's another very tangible example. And of course, the last example that I can think of off the top of my head is that doctor in China who sounded the alarm, knowing that he was possibly going to get in trouble by the Chinese government who likes to censor things. And he died. And finally now I saw an article that the Chinese government is pardoning him.
What did he die of?
The same disease,
the virus,
COVID-19.
Oh, he died of COVID.
Yeah. And unfortunately, there are many other examples.
Can I ask you, maybe you could clarify? They're saying China is clear. Are they saying that because they're not allowing for us to know, because they're communist, or it's clear?
So there's no way of us knowing for sure. It would be really bad for them at this point to be lying. Because there's a lot of people. So even though they censor social media, people have found ways around it. And so let's hope that it's true.
Well, again, they're saying that, this is because it's nationwide, that all nations must share in a common bond to eradicate this. And the matter of fact, there's specialists in Paris and at Mount Sinai who are working on these new drugs. So hopefully, China is still on board with this to try to eradicate, because it would be to their benefit as well to learn from everybody else's.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Our experience in China says that they tell the Western world what it wants to hear, and it is not true. That was
I
our
hear you.
experience when we visited.
I mean, we can let's not go off on a tangent too far with
Okay,
that.
we'll stop.
Thank you, but your point is well taken, and I think that's on a lot of people's minds. Another personal example is my cousin, who's supposed to have a big Hasidic wedding in a few weeks, is instead going to, I still don't know exactly what they're going to do, but supposedly there's going to be some kind of tiny wedding today that we're going to get information to sign into. We're still looking forward. And
Rabbi, I know I've heard of one wedding in the Lubavitch community that they have a tent in their backyard, and so I don't know why I'm on the share experience, but I got it, and it's on Fields Avenue. So why isn't the police, stopping that business?
Yeah, and that's another whole tangent that we can go on to. But for those that are following the rules and in the process protecting lives, they're making a sacrifice. You can imagine a bride who's been looking forward to, her wedding day and have, this vision of what it's going to be, and then it's completely shot.
Sure.
All right, so let's move on to the common translation of sacrifice. Comes from the Latin term, I'm going to say this wrong, sacrificium, derived from the Latin sacrificus, performing priestly functions or sacrifices, right? So that doesn't really have the closeness aspect per se. It doesn't necessarily have the giving anything up aspect per se. It's more of a holiness thing. Which combines the concept sacra, sacred things, and facere, to do or perform. The literal translation of korban suggests that by bringing the korban, and for those that just signed on, korban is an offering to God, an animal offering or a food offering that's commonly translated as sacrifice. When bringing it a person or the nation, because some of them were personal and some of them were national or groups, becomes closer to God, right? Whatever that means for that person or in general. Still, there's no clear explanation in the Torah for why an animal or food sacrifice would bring someone closer to God.
I don't understand. I never did.
Right? Most people don't. So I have a little video here, a little kind of cute video that shows what sacrifice might have looked like in the temple, but because several people are calling in, I'm going to save it for now, and then maybe later, if we have time, I'll show it, since some people won't be able to hear it.
Oh, I can't see it.
Able to see it. All right, so the purpose of korbanot. It seems from at least the times of Maimonides and Nachmanides, and probably before that, Jews have had a hard time understanding why God would want animal sacrifices. For Maimonides, it seems, sacrifices are not really important to God, but merely a concession to accommodate the limited spiritual imagination of the ancient Israelites, as he writes. And this is from the Guide to the Perplexed. It is impossible to go suddenly from one extreme to the other. The nature of man will not allow him to suddenly discontinue everything to which he has been accustomed. Now God sent Moses to make the Israelites a kingdom of priests and a holy nation by means of the knowledge of God. And these are just some quotes that he brings. Know before this day and consider it in the hearts that the Lord is God. The Israelites were commanded to devote themselves to his sacrifice, to his service, and to serve him with all your heart, and you shall serve. All right. Anyway, so that's basically the argument here, is that it just wasn't realistic, right? The idea is along the lines of God does not give us more than we can handle. And that's a belief that a lot of people have.
Oh,
Clearly
no.
Not everybody.
Not at this moment. Oh, no.
Right? right? Exactly. I've always found that argument, while I could see how it's comforting, a little bit challenging. The people were being restricted from bringing human sacrifices, right? So I'm not a historian. I can't tell you exactly what was happening at the time that the Torah was given, but the argument is that at that time, people weren't only doing animal sacrifices, they were even doing human sacrifice. So this was actually moving people forward, that they can do animal sacrifices, but not human sacrifices. It was unrealistic to expect them to completely give up, right? And the example of where we almost go to human sacrifice, of course, is the binding of Isaac.
Okay.
But then it's called in, it's reined in. Another piece from continuing with Maimonides from the Guide to the Perplexed. Maimonides states that the Egyptians worshipped Ares. What's that?
Yes.
Ares. That right?
Yes. Sounds right.
Okay. And therefore abstained from killing sheep and held shepherds in contempt. So this one kind of, well, we'll keep going. Quote, behold, we shall sacrifice the abomination of the Egyptians, right? So this is a quote from when the Passover story, when the Israelites were told to bring an animal sacrifice. They were bringing basically the animal that the Egyptians were worshiping. For every shepherd is an abomination to the Egyptians. The Egyptians felt, that shepherds were mistreating their gods. Most idolaters objected to killing cattle, holding the species of animal in great estimation. Therefore, the people of Hodu, India, up to this day do not slaughter cattle, even in those countries where other animals are slaughtered. In order to eradicate this false principle, the Torah commands us to offer sacrifices. So here it seems to be suggesting the opposite, which is that it wasn't that people were offering animal sacrifices, they weren't. So by us offering animal sacrifice, we were actually saying these animals are not gods, because if they were gods, we wouldn't be able to kill them.
An interpretation.
Yeah. All right. So it's interesting. Either way, the main thrust of the argument is that this is moving the Jews and humanity forward, but exactly what the argument is seems to be a little bit different in this quote. The main temptation at the time was idol worship, and thus they needed animal sacrifice to counter idol worship. If Maimonides' rationale is correct, I think it is fair to say that it failed, right? And the idea was that this would eliminate idol worship, because throughout the prophets we see repeated relapse to idol worship. Even many of the kings of Israel and Judah ended up worshiping idols at times. Nachmanides, who does not have a hospital named for him in Brooklyn, but was still a pretty important scholar and philosopher, takes issue with Maimonides after citing from the Guide to the Perplexed, and he says, referring to Maimonides, he says, his statements are preposterous. They, quote, heal the great hurt superficially, end quote, i.e. provide a shallow answer to a difficult problem and render the table of the Lord disgusting by limiting its use to placate the wicked and the foolish. But the Torah states that they, the sacrificers, are food of the offering made by fire for a sweet savor. Right? And so that God does enjoy this. and wants it, and thus have an intrinsic value and not the mere polemical role of abolishing distorted conceptions or abolishing idol worship. Furthermore, this will not cure the perverse Egyptian concept, but will rather enhance it. The wicked Egyptians worshipped Ares and Taurus, the ram and the bull, because they ascribed to these animals special powers, and therefore did not eat them. Anyway, I'll skip the rest of the quote for now. As I understand Nachmanides, he offers an alternative rationale. The main point of animal sacrifice is for the person to see the animal being killed as a substitute for his own death, like in the binding of Isaac, or as well as like in the ritual of Kaparot.
I didn't know that.
Yes.
Right?
Okay.
So Isaac was originally, the plan, it seemed, was for Isaac to be sacrificed. And then at the last minute, it says that the ram was caught and went instead of him.
Okay.
Right? And basically to scare him into doing the right thing. Right? If you're seeing this animal being killed and it's supposed to be you, well, that might get your attention.
Right.
Even so, Nachmanides is hesitant in offering a reason at all, and ultimately leaves it to the mystics, and says that this is really, beyond the realm of regular rational thinking. Leave it to the Kabbalists, which I think for a lot of us makes more sense because it's so hard to understand this. Indeed, according to the Ritva, in the Sefer HaZikaron, Maimonides didn't believe that it was a means to an end. Maimonides didn't believe that it was a means to an end either, but in effect used the explanation to placate the masses. Right, and here's a quote from the Ritva. Our master Nachmanides of blessed memory rejects the explanation of the sacrifices offered in the Guide to the Perplexed. We need not here repeat his words. It is my opinion that the genuine Kabbalistic tradition concerning the sacrifices and Maimonides' apparently feeble rationale caused the master, referring to Nachmanides, to criticize him for the sake of the sanctity of the Torah and God's holy name. In the context of sacrifice, however, Maimonides chose his name. And many other explanations of the commandments in order to provide them with some meaning and to furnish the masses with some rational arguments against heretics, rather than believing these to be the principal reasons. And that kind of goes to the broader issue of, should we be studying the meaning, the purpose of mitzvot, or should we just do them? Right? The rationale for studying the purpose is because we're rational beings, and it makes it really hard to do things when we don't understand what they're achieving or what their purpose is. The risk is that in that process, we could say, you know what, I don't agree with this rationale.
Right, and go further away from it.
And say, I'm not going to do it. Or I'm going to substitute it. Because it doesn't make sense to me, and I'm going to find something that does make sense to me.
Right.
And if the issue is really that there's intrinsic value in that particular mitzvah, then when you substitute it, you're losing that.
It makes sense.
All right. Animal sacrifices, still important. Despite the encouraging messages from the prophets and the rabbis, which I'm sure you've all heard and seen at different sermons and times, that say that tzedakah, our table, like our Shabbat table, prayer, and general good deeds substitute for korbanot.
For sacrifice.
What's that?
For sacrifice?
Yeah, exactly. Basically, after the temple was destroyed, people were very upset. They said, we can't serve God the way we're supposed to serve God.
Yeah.
We're doomed.
Right.
And so, and even at the times of the prophets, when people would offer sacrifices but then go cheat their neighbor or do horrible things, the prophets would say, your sacrifices are useless if you're acting like horrible people.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are times that it says God doesn't want your sacrifices or things like that. In that context, still it seems that until relatively recently, and for many even to this day, observant Jews yearn to go back to our ancient practices. Simply put, animal sacrifice worship is plan A, and our practice now is plan B, or C when we consider that we now can't even go to synagogue because of the pandemic.
Wow.
So live streaming is plan C.
Yes.
The best example of this can be seen in the Amida, in the standing prayer, in the blessing Ritzeh, where we say, V'hashev et ha'avoda lidvir betecha, which in the Sim Shalom Siddur, the one that we have at CBJ, translates as, restore worship to your sanctuary. Right? Now, if you read that and you're going at 100 miles per hour during davening, you're like, okay, what's the, that's fine. Except it is easy to miss the yearning for a return to korbanot, because the translation, while technically accurate, does not convey the traditional meaning of the word avodah, which is generally understood to include animal sacrifice.
Okay.
Right? So it was a clever translation because it is true, but that word also has context. Even if one does not yearn for the return of animal sacrifice, understanding them helps one understand traditional Jewish spirituality as well as history, since many important stories revolve around the temple and animal sacrifice. So I just brought one story because I think it's not very good way of teaching when you say there are lots of examples of something, but then you don't give an example.
Right.
So this one is, the context of this quote is in a discussion about animal sacrifice, and certain animals weren't allowed to be brought for sacrifice if they had a blemish, if they had some kind of injury or defect or something like that.
They wanted perfection? Is that they wanted perfection?
They wanted perfection, exactly. Right? Which is another whole mysterious thing. Like, what's the point of that?
I don't know what all this mumbling is.
So Dora says, from the other room, that it's not a sacrifice if it has a blemish. It's only a sacrifice if it's a good one, right? So remember, the economy was strongly based on agriculture, and the value of your animal went up if the healthier it was, and the more productive and the better looking it was.
Right, but Rabbi, it was also on somebody's means, no? I mean, if you didn't have, you could bring smaller.
Exactly, right?
Korban,
so
right? Sacrifice.
Yeah, if you didn't have the means, in many of the sacrifices, you were allowed to replace them. So instead of bringing a bull, for example, they could bring a bird or some flour and oil.
Right.
But in terms of the blemish thing, that well, I guess it applied to the birds too.
Yeah, but still, it was right. Still, it was had to be a perfect.
Yeah, and it wouldn't be very nice to bring spoiled flour and oil. But anyway, yeah. So whereas the Bible enumerates only 12 disqualifying blemishes in animals, and 12 in the case of a priest, because that was also true and this is even harder to understand, in the priests, if they had an imperfection, they weren't allowed to do the service in the temple. The Mishnah subdivides them, referring to the blemishes, in the minutest detail.
Mm-hmm.
The whole of chapter 6, and this quote is from the Jewish Virtual Library. And you can click into that link when you get the document. Where am I? The Mishnah, the whole of chapter 6 of Tractate Bechorot is devoted to an enumeration of those blemishes in an animal. They are divided into permanent and transient blemishes. Permanent blemishes being if it continues for 80 days, etc. As an example of the detail where the Bible merely says blind, the Mishnah enumerates a pierced eye, a defective eye, a slit eyelid, a speck in the eye, a commingling of the iris and the outer parts, right? It's really hair splitting. Various growths in the eye and their retina, or if its lip is pierced. Anyway, you get the point. But the reason I'm bringing this quote is for the next part here of this story. According to the legend of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa and the Talmud, it was the infliction of one of those two blemishes by Bar Kamsa in the sacrifice offered up by the Roman emperor, which we count as a blemish, but the Romans didn't. And the obstinate refusal of Reb Zechariah ben Avkulas to make any exception, which was the immediate cause of the Roman war. Right? And so the Romans were really powerful. And Bar Kamsa, who had been slighted by the rabbis in the community, decided to get his revenge. And so he went to the Roman and he said, I suggest you offer to bring this animal for a sacrifice in the temple. And I'll prove to you that the Jews don't respect you because they're going to reject your sacrifice. And so I don't remember what the particular blemish was, but the Romans came and tried to offer it. And this rabbi said, nope, you can't offer it. And in the Romans' perspective, whatever the blemish was so minute that it was irrelevant. But in the rabbi's perspective, it was significant enough that they were willing to risk everything just not to violate this rule. Right? And then ultimately that led to the war, which led to the destruction of the temple. Now, if we don't understand animal sacrifice and how they worked, this whole story would be completely lost on us. And it would make it harder to understand the context of how that war started. Anyway, I just thought it's another motivator to look into this, this area that, for the most part, people wish we could skip when we read it. So for these reasons, I'll delve into the sacrifices a little this week and continue for the next couple of weeks. Having said that, I will start with one that I think is easiest to relate to, which is the Thanksgiving offering. Right? There's several different kinds of sacrifices or korbanot. There was the olah, which was the whole thing was burned. There was a sin offering, a guilt offering, a whole bunch of different ones. The Thanksgiving one, I think, is the most relatable.
Okay, use that.
All right. So it's known as the Zevach. It falls into the category of Zevach Shlamim, well-being offerings.
Right.
Is a category that includes three different types of offerings. The Thanksgiving offering, as well as, I don't have the other two here. One is if somebody makes a neder, a promise to give an offering. So basically they say, they kind of do a little bargain with God. They say, hey, if you get me out of this mess,
Right, I'll give you, right, I'll give you, right, I'll vow to do whatever.
exactly. Right. And then there's also, so there's the Thanksgiving one, and then there's also just, you know what? I love God so much. I just want to bring an offering for no reason. Nothing good happened to me per se. I just want to bring an offering.
True generosity, right? Pure generosity.
Pure generosity, and I think also pure spirituality. The person wants to, when we think of korbanot in terms of closeness, the person wants to be close to God. Right? Okay. So Zevach Toda is the name of the Thanksgiving offering. So Zevach means like slaughtering, like sacrifice, and Toda, we all know what that means.
Right.
So when would somebody bring a Zevach Toda? There are four category reasons to bring one. One is a what's that?
Okay, I think again, if someone is suffering with illness, right? You bring an offering of Thanksgiving for your recovery.
Exactly. All right, so that's one of them. The other ones are a passage through the desert, release from prison, surviving a storm at sea.
Okay.
You can easily extend that to surviving a very turbulent flight.
Right. Or journey, right? That's right.
Of course, the one that's most on our minds right now is recovering from serious disease or from a pandemic.
Right. So, Rabbi, basically, we're still doing those types of, in the form of a Misha Berach, right?
Arlene, you're absolutely right. You're ahead of me.
No, I'm sorry.
That's okay. I'm
sorry. All right, I'm just thinking ahead. All right, but I'm thinking ahead. Okay.
So where do we get these reasons for giving one? And the Torah doesn't mention any particular reasons. And in the Torah, there's also the way this category of the well-being offerings were done was it would be like a party. And so you would offer it, and then afterwards, people would have this great feast. And unlike some other offerings, like, for example, on Passover, where you needed to really, gobble it down quickly because you couldn't leave it to the next day, with this one, you had an extra day to eat it. All right, so we get it from Tractate Brachot. So this is from the Babylonian Talmud, and Daf 54b. And the 12 is just when it's broken down in Sefaria. Sefaria is the website that is really helpful in getting quotes from Torah when doing a presentation. So Rav Yehuda said that Rav said, four must offer thanks to God with a thanks offering and a special blessing. They are seafarers, those who walk in the desert, one who was ill and recovered, and one who was incarcerated in prison and went out. All of these appear in the verses of the psalm, right? So their source is getting it from the Psalms. Often when they say it appears there in other contexts, but they're kind of pulling it together. The modern equivalent, which is where Arlene was going, of this is the Birchat HaGomel. So this is a tradition to this day where we
bench gomel,
where we bench gomel, exactly. So, for example, if somebody has heart surgery or something like that, we traditionally would call them up to the Torah and they express the gratitude. So interestingly, and I think this ties back to the live streaming a little bit, I pulled another quote or two from the Talmud that okay, pull one quote, not two, from the Talmud in discussing the Birchat Gomo. The Gemara asks, what blessing does he recite? Rabbi Yehuda said, blessed is ... he who bestows acts of loving kindness. Abaye said, and he must offer thanks before 10 people, as it is written in the same chapter, let them exalt him, capital him, right, referring to God, also in the congregation of the people, and praise him in the assembly of the elders. And congregation indicates a group of at least 10. Right? So, so just like before, a word can mean just literally the word, but sometimes they also have additional meaning. And generally, when it says congregation, it's understood to mean 10. Mar Zutra said, 2 of them must be sages, as it is stated there, and praise him in the assembly of elders. These elders are the sages. So again, elders can just mean old people, but often in the Talmud, elders refer to sages. And the use of the plural indicates a minimum of 2. Rav Ashi strongly objects to this. Say that all of them must be sages. He's saying if you're going to go that way, then you might as well just say all of them have to be. The Gemara rejects this. Is it written in the congregation of elders? No. In the congregation of the people is written. And the sages are among them. Yet there's still room to object. Say that 10 are from the rest of the people. And in addition, there must be 2 sages. No satisfactory answer was found. Right? And this happens in the Talmud. Sometimes they just agree to disagree. Fascinating concept, right?
Well, this reminds me of the story, Rabbi, with the spies. How many do you find? Do you find hundreds of worthy people? If you don't, do you destroy everybody? I mean, again, it's a question of...
So you're talking about Sodom and Gomorrah.
Right.
You're mixing 2 stories there. The spies was a different one.
But, okay, all right.
But where Abraham was kind of bargaining with God.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway, so then it brings another story because we all love a story. The Gemara relates Rabbi Yehuda fell sick and recovered. Rav Chana of Baghdad and the sages, interesting, Baghdad was around back then, right? And the sages entered to visit him. They said to him, blessed is God who gave you to us and did not give you to the dust. He said to them, you have exempted me from offering thanks, as your statement fulfilled my obligation to recite a blessing. Right? It's interesting how they dealt with these things. So some authorities say to this day, you can't say the blessing unless there's a minyan and unless there are 2 sages. Luckily for us, that's not the commonly accepted ruling, because otherwise we would not say it very often. Because first you have to figure out what you mean by sages, and it gets complicated. So, thinking about how it ties in for us, these technicalities of when you're allowed to say a blessing. And then there was another piece which I didn't bring here, which said, if somebody says it outside of a minyan, then they should still say it with a minyan later when they're with a minyan, but say it without saying God's name, right? So to cover your bases. Right. So there's different ways that they've dealt with times when you couldn't get a minyan.
Like now.
Like now, which brings us to...
I want to be relative to now.
So relative to now, we've been struggling at CBJ with whether to count a virtual minyan as a minyan, and if we do, should we count it for everything, or should we count it for some things? Right? It's a whole new reality that the Talmud doesn't deal with.
Well, you have to make it go forward. You have to.
Got to make it go forward, exactly. So right now, we found that several rabbis, including some Orthodox rabbis, have given a concession to saying Kaddish with a virtual minyan, but not, like the repetition of the Amida and some of the other aspects of it. And so we are going to allow for people who need to say mourner's Kaddish and who feel comfortable doing that on a virtual minyan to do it. And we're also going to have an alternative Kaddish for those who still want to say it, but who don't feel comfortable saying the traditional Kaddish, that can still acknowledge their departed, whether it's a yahrzeit or whether they're in the year of mourning, or whether they're saying it for somebody else who is really meaningful to them, or who has nobody to say it for them, as Roy often does. And so this is an opportunity. So as you may know, Kaddish, at least my understanding was I don't know what I'm doing here. Was originally recited after learning. It was added into prayers and as a prayer for mourning later. And so those that want to say Kaddish can recite it. There is a longer version, but which is known as Kaddish D'Rabbanan, which a big part is in Aramaic and is extremely hard to say for most people. So for those that want to say Kaddish, I'm going to put my tallis on, and you can say it along with me.
Right with them.
This thing is not high enough to get me, but whatever, you get the point. And for everybody who's not saying Kaddish, please respond Amen.
Okay.
Rabbi,
if you're comfortable. Yes.
I just wanted to make sure everybody knows about the passing of Ruth Kaplan.
Right.
Okay.
Amazing. Yes, Sandy, amazing. 101?
Yeah. 101.
Amazing.
And we'll post, the family is sitting Shiva in Manhattan, but of course, that we're not visiting, but they do have a message about where donations could be made. And the other, and we'll post that. I'll have Leah send it out tomorrow. The other,
and Lily the daughter is also saying that you can call in, and she's also going to try to do some virtual Shiva.
Good. Okay, that I don't have the information. Yeah. Do you have that information?
I spoke to Lily last night, so she's going to try to put something out there.
If you have it, if you could send it to Linda, please. The other passing I wanted to tell you all about is Linda Cantor's mother passed away.
Right. I heard about.
And,
I heard about that too.
I don't have the details. That's also, of course, Stacey Austin's grandmother. She was also elderly, although not quite that old, but she was elderly, and unfortunately she was very confused towards the end. But really quite a wonderful woman as well, for those of you that didn't know her. So I'll give the family a call, and we'll post that as well. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
thank you.
And of course for
Rabbi?
all the... Yes.
Lenora Gillivan, do you have a transliteration of the Kaddish?
I do.
Okay.
I will put the transliteration up.
Thank you.
Because I think those that can read it in Hebrew probably know it by heart. If you can read it in Hebrew, you probably also have a siddur. So just grab your siddur, and I'll give you a minute to do that. While we're giving people a minute to do that, I logged onto Facebook on Friday, and I saw my old friend from Yeshiva, Rabbi Citro, who's the rabbi at the Karlobach Shul, who was doing a Kabbalat Shabbat. And I thought to myself, Shabbat is late enough that even without doing services on Shabbat, you are allowed to bring Shabbat in earlier, and you are allowed to do a Kabbalat Shabbat with music before bringing Shabbat in. And so next week, we will have that. We won't have the whole Friday night service, but we'll just have that first part until Bartho. So this way we can, what's that?
That's
Dora
great.
says that's the part she likes. So this way we'll still be able to sing together, and at least have a little bit more familiar, normalcy in our lives, which I think is most people's goal, is to have as much normalcy as possible.
It'll be the same link. It will be the same link and phone number for Friday.
Thank you, Dan. Yes.
No problem.
This same one that we called today?
Exactly. Yes.
And that we could dial in Friday, what time?
It's a good question. I didn't get that far.
Okay.
Can we also just go to the
let's say 6. What's that?
And can we also just go to the website and click on the live streaming button? I think
Yes,
that's
you can.
Yeah.
Yes.
What time do you guys want? What are you thinking? I guess it doesn't
I
make
can't do any of this. I can only get it from Jessica.
All right. Do you want to do like 6 o'clock?
Okay.
Yeah, well, Shabbos starts about 7.
Yeah.
Right.
So
So 6
that makes
would be
it
good.
close. What's that?
Yeah. You want to make it a little earlier?
You want 5:30?
All right. Well, all right. Let's try for 5:30.
What about 5:45?
Oh, my goodness.
Okay. Listen.
I think 6 o'clock will keep it simple. No, unless people are eating dinner. Is that what you're concerned about?
Mm,
Well, it would hold up dinner. Yeah.
Got
So what time is it?
5:45.
Give me a
5:45.
pen.
Then we could finish by about 6:30 and have dinner, correct?
Not even
Yes.
6:30. We're talking a half hour.
Oh, then my opinion is to go with 6 o'clock.
All right, keep it simple. 6 o'clock.
Yeah.
And then Rabbi, and then Rabbi, you also have the Monday and Thursday at 7:30.
Exactly. Then there's also a service Monday and Thursday, and the Rabbinical Assembly, the rabbinical group of conservative Judaism,
Just give me a pen by the phone.
released the rights of the Sim Shalom Siddur for this emergency. So we're able to, for those that were on last time, I put together this whole thing because I didn't have that. But we now we'll be able to have the familiar format, and then we can still have, extra prayers for the times. All right.
Will it be the weekday siddur or the Shabbat and holiday siddur?
I believe it'll be the weekday one.
Okay.
I think I downloaded that one. All right. So Mornis Kaddish, here we go. Let me make this a little smaller, and then this way we can get it all on one page.
I got to get dressed.
Okay. Are you able to see? Lenora, are you able to see it?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, perfect.
All right. Here goes. It gadal v'it kadash shemer rabba
Amen.
v'yomah divrach dirateh v'yamlich machateh v'chayefon u'v'yomefon v'chayeh dechol Bnei Yisrael ha'gala v'zman parim v'yivru.
Amen.
Amen.
Yehi shmei rabba barach v'yolam v'maya Yisbarach,
Yisbarach,
Yishabach,
Yishteva,
Yisbar,
Yisrael,
Yismaseh,
Yismaseh,
Yisadar,
Yisadar,
Yisav,
Yisrael, Kavel,
Yisrael, Shmei
V'Kavel, Shmei
Dekudesha,
Kusha,
Richo,
Bericho,
La'ela,
Elam,
Mikol,
Kol,
Birchata, B'shirata,
B'Shirata,
Tishbechata,
Tishbachata,
V'nechamata,
V'Nechamata,
Amiran Bi'alma, Yimru, Amen.
Yamru, Amen.
Yehei Shlam
Yehi,
Rabba,
Shalom, Rabba, Min
Shemaya,
Shemaya,
V'chaim Tovim
Chaim,
Aleinu,
Aleinu,
V'al
Ve'al
Yisrael,
Kol
V'yimru,
Yisrael,
Amen.
V'Yamru, Amen.
Aseh
Yosef
Shalom
Shalom,
B'mamav,
B'Mamav,
Uyaseh Shalom,
V'Yasef Shalom,
Aleinu, V'al Kol
Aleinu, Ve'al Kol
Yisrael,
Yisrael, V'Yamru,
V'yimru,
Amen.
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 Please be safe. Please take the warning seriously. It's literally life and death, as you know, but it's good to reinforce.
Absolutely.
All right.
Rabbi, this was wonderful. Yep, very good.
All
All right.
Thank you,
All right.
Rabbi.
Be well,
You guys,
Thank
Monday.
you.
Be well, everyone.
Have a good
Thank you.
weekend.
Thank you.
Rabbi?
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.
Rabbi?